A millionaire accidentally picked up a photo that fell out of a SHOESHINE boy's shirt. When he looked at the photo, his mouth dropped open because the faint hum of the subway reverberated through the cavernous station, a mix of hurried footsteps, muffled announcements, and the faint metallic clatter of coins in a tin cup. Albert adjusted his tailored coat, his sharp eyes scanning the scene with a detachment that had grown second nature. New York's subway was a far cry from the manicured halls of his Boston office, but it held a certain unpolished charm. He didn't know why he'd chosen this route to meet his old friends, but something about the rush of everyday life seemed to ground him, if only temporarily. Crowds shuffled past in a rhythmic, almost mechanical dance. Heels clacked against the tiled floor. Voices rose and fell, the distant roar of an approaching train blending into the chaos. For Albert Howard, the noise was distant, a mere hum in his mind. He stood still amidst the commotion, his tailored suit pristine, his silver hair combed back with precision. At 68, he exuded an air of quiet authority, yet his eyes betrayed heaviness. Memories weighed on him, their edges sharp and unforgiving. The faint smell of shoe polish cut through the subway's stale air. As he descended the steps, a small figure caught his attention. A boy, no more than 7, sat cross-legged by a pillar, a battered SHOESHINE kit at his side. His clothes hung loose on his frame, the sleeves frayed, and the knees patched with mismatched fabric. The boy worked with an intensity that didn't match his age, his tiny hands moving rhythmically as he polished a stranger's shoes. His face, dirt-streaked but determined, carried an air of quiet resilience that tugged at something deep in Albert's chest. Albert lingered. The boy's posture was intent, shoulders hunched as he concentrated, but it was his face that held Albert captive. Although he had a rougher appearance from living on the streets, his features, such as his sharp cheekbones, tilt of the chin, and intensity of his eyes, were startlingly similar to Adam's at that age. A pang hit Albert squarely in the chest, a memory rising unbidden. Adam grinning, holding a baseball bat, his jersey too large for his frame. Albert's polished Italian loafers drew the boy's attention next. With a quick, practiced movement, the boy stood, his hazel eyes locking onto Albert's. "Shoeshine, mister?" His voice was light, but his tone carried a gravity that suggested he wasn't asking, but imploring. Albert hesitated, then nodded, extending his polished leather shoes. "Sure. Go ahead." The boy moved quickly, brushing the surface of the shoes with a practiced hand. His small fingers dug into a tin of polish, spreading it evenly. There was no chatter, no forced charm, just the efficient movements of someone who worked to survive. Albert watched, his thoughts spinning. "You're good at this," Albert said, his voice softer than usual. He wasn't sure why he'd spoken. Small talk wasn't his forte. The boy glanced up briefly. "Been doing it a while," he replied, his tone clipped, almost dismissive. Then, more quietly, he added, "Gotta eat." Albert nodded, unsure how to respond. As the boy worked, Albert noticed something fall from his pocket, a small, creased photograph. The boy didn't seem to notice, engrossed in his task. Albert bent to pick it up, intending to return it, but the image stopped him cold. His breath hitched. The photograph showed a younger Adam, unmistakably, with his lopsided grin and confident stance. Beside him stood a young woman, her face unfamiliar, her smile bright and open. "Where did you get this?" Albert's voice was quiet, but firm. The boy froze, his hand stilling on the shoe. Slowly he looked up, his face tense. "It's mine," he said, his voice edged with defiance. Then softer. "Why?" "Who are they?" Albert asked, though he already knew one answer. His grip on the photo tightened slightly, the edges crinkling under his fingers. The boy's gaze darted to the photograph, then back to Albert. He shifted, uncomfortable. That's my dad, I think. And my mum. People say her name was Shirley. She died when I was born. Albert's heart sank. And your father? He pressed, his voice faltering slightly. I don't know, the boy admitted. She never told me. Just left the photo behind. His voice carried an edge of defensiveness, as though he expected to be accused of lying. That's all I got of him. Albert stared at the photograph again, his thoughts tangling. 7 years had passed since Adam's death, yet here was this boy, a stranger, holding a piece of his son's life. The boy resembled Adam, not just in features, but in his quiet determination, his grit. What's your name? Albert asked, his tone gentler now. Justin, the boy replied. His eyes narrowed slightly. Why are you asking so many questions? Albert hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. You remind me of someone, he said simply. And this photo, it's important. Justin's small frame tensed. He straightened, clutching the polished rag tightly, his face unreadable. Lightly he whispered, Because the man in this photo, your father, he's my son. The words hung heavy in the air. The dim lighting of the subway station did little to soften the sharpness of Justin's features as he sat across from Albert on a bench pushed to the side of the bustling platform. Justin fidgeted, his fingers curling protectively around the shoe kit balanced on his lap. His eyes darted to the ground, then back up to Albert, gauging him with a wariness that spoke volumes. What do you want to know? Justin asked, his voice steady, but lacking the sharpness it had earlier. Albert studied him, careful to keep his expression neutral. I'm curious about you. Where do you live? Who takes care of you? Justin scoffed, leaning back slightly, as if distancing himself from the questions. I don't live anywhere. I just stay where I can. Under bridges, in alleyways. Doesn't matter much as long as I'm out of the cold. Albert's chest tightened. The words were delivered with the casualness of someone resigned to their situation. But there was a heaviness beneath them that Albert couldn't ignore. What about food? Who feeds you? Me, Justin shrugged. Shining shoes gets me enough for bread. Maybe some soup if I'm lucky. Sometimes people give me stuff. Sometimes they don't. Albert pressed his lips together, stifling the wave of emotion that threatened to rise. He didn't want pity to cloud his judgment or insult the boy's dignity. Instead, he focused on the photo Justin had tucked back into his pocket, the tether between them. He decided to tread carefully. And that photo. Albert began slowly. You said it's your parents? Justin hesitated, his hand tightening around the edge of his shoebox. Yeah, that's my mum and I think that's my dad. His voice dropped slightly, the last word tinged with uncertainty. But I don't really know him. Your mum? Shirley, right? What was she like? Albert asked, leaning forward slightly. For the first time, Justin's guarded expression softened. I don't remember much, he admitted. She died after I was born. That's what the people at the shelter told me. They said she was nice but tired, sick from something, I guess. They didn't talk about her much. He hesitated, his gaze fixed on the ground. The photo's all I have of her. It's all I know. Albert felt the weight of the boy's words settle over him like a heavy coat. He wanted to press further, but the brittle edge to Justin's voice held him back. Instead, he shifted the focus to Adam, the man in the photo, whose presence loomed larger than life in Albert's mind. And your dad? You said you think that's him in the picture. What makes you say that? Justin shrugged again, his eyes narrowing as if recalling fragments of overheard conversations. They used to talk about someone named Adam. Not much, but enough. I always think why he doesn't come to find me if he is my father. He paused, his fingers tracing the edge of his kit absent-mindedly. No one else can compensate me. It has to be him. Albert's hands tightened into fists, but he hid them in his coat pockets. He wanted to reach out to confirm what Justin likely already knew in his heart. But how could he, when the truth came with a flood of guilt and regret? He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "You're sure about his name?" Albert asked carefully. "Adam?" Justin nodded, his gaze steady now. "That's all I've got. No last name, no stories. Just that name and this photo." He let out a small, hollow laugh. "I don't even know if he's alive. Maybe he's like her. Gone." Albert's stomach churned at the words, the boy's innocence and resilience clashing against the harshness of his reality. He wanted to tell Justin the truth, to say that Adam was gone, but not in the way Justin imagined. But it wasn't the time. Not yet. "I might know someone who can help you," Albert said after a long pause, his voice measured. "Someone who might know more about your father." Justin tilted his head, suspicion flashing in his eyes again. "Why would you help me?" Albert hesitated, caught off guard by the question. "Let's just say, I think your story is one worth hearing, and I think I can help." The boy studied him for a long moment, the silence between them thick with unspoken questions. Finally, Justin nodded, the slightest crack in his defenses beginning to show. "Okay," he said simply, "but don't make promises you can't keep." Albert smiled faintly, though his chest still felt heavy. "I won't." Albert looked down at Justin's diminutive frame as they stood and started to move toward the exit, which was a burden that no child should have to bear. The boy didn't know it yet, but Albert had already made up his mind. Justin deserved answers. He deserved more than this life had given him, and Albert would do whatever it took to provide them. "Let's get you something to eat," Albert said softly, his hand hovering protectively near the boy's shoulder. Justin didn't reply, but the faintest flicker of relief crossed his face. Together, they stepped into the streets of New York, their journey just beginning. The rhythmic clatter of the train filled the silence between them. Albert sat stiffly, his hands folded neatly in his lap, staring out the window at the fading skyline of New York. The faint glow of the city lights flickered across his face, but his mind was elsewhere. Justin sat beside him, clutching his SHOESHINE kit like it was the only thing tethering him to reality. His small feet barely touched the floor, and every now and then his wary eyes darted toward Albert. Albert had cancelled his dinner plans with his old friends with a few curt words and a hasty apology. He wasn't sure why. It wasn't like him to be impulsive, but something about Justin made everything else feel trivial. The call had been short, the excuse vague, but his friends would understand, or at least he hoped they would. The boy shifted beside him, breaking Albert's reverie. "So, why'd you change your plans?" Justin asked, his voice cautious but curious. Albert turned his gaze to him, noting the boy's thin frame silhouetted against the soft light of the train car. "Something more important came up," he said simply, avoiding the weight of explanation. Justin's fingers tightened around the handle of his kit. He glanced down, his expression unreadable. "I don't need looking after," he muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. Albert studied him for a moment, the defensiveness in his tone stark against the vulnerability in his posture. "Everyone needs help, sometimes," Albert said quietly, turning his gaze back to the window. "Even me." Justin didn't reply. He just stared at the SHOESHINE kit in his lap, his lips pressing into a thin line. The train rumbled on, the sound filling the gap in their conversation. Albert's thoughts drifted, unbidden, to Adam. He could almost see his son sitting where Justin was now, all sharp angles and boyish defiance. Adam had been full of life, always moving forward, always brimming with ideas and plans. And yet, he'd kept so much hidden. Too much. Albert swallowed hard, pushing the memories aside. There would be time for that later, once he was sure. The train lurched slightly and the lights overhead flickered. Albert sat back, exhaling slowly. He didn't push further. He knew better than to force trust. It had to be earned. And for Justin, that would take time. He could wait. They rode in silence for a while longer, the cityscape giving way to open fields and dark stretches of forest. Albert's mind churned with questions about Shirley, about Adam, about the boy sitting next to him. He didn't have the answers yet, but he was determined to find them. As the train pressed on toward Boston, Albert allowed himself a brief moment of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this journey would lead to something more than answers. Maybe it would lead to healing, for both of them. The cab pulled up to a wrought iron gate, adorned with intricate designs, its black finish glinting faintly under the cold Boston sky. Behind the gate, Albert's mansion loomed, a monolithic structure of grey stone that seemed both grand and unwelcoming. Justin's gaze flickered toward it, his small frame tense as he clutched his shoeshine kit. He'd never seen a house this big before, much less imagined stepping inside one. "This is your home?" Justin asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Albert nodded, his eyes softening as he noticed the boy's apprehension. "It's home," he replied, though the word felt heavier than he'd intended. Home hadn't been the same since Adam's death, the laughter and warmth replaced by long silences and unspoken grief. The gates creaked open and the cab rolled forward. As they approached the front entrance, a woman appeared at the door. Donna, clad in a soft grey sweater, had her arms folded tightly across her chest. Her eyes scanned the car with practiced disinterest, but when Albert stepped out with Justin, her expression stiffened. "Albert?" she began, her voice clipped. "Who is this?" "This is Justin," Albert said simply, gesturing for the boy to follow. "He's a guest." Donna's brow furrowed as her eyes swept over Justin's scrawny figure, taking in his ragged clothes and wary posture. "A guest?" she repeated, her tone edged with disbelief. "And you thought it appropriate to bring him here without telling me?" Albert's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice calm. "I'll explain everything inside. It's cold." Donna stepped aside, but said nothing more, her gaze lingering on Justin as he shuffled past her. The boy kept his eyes down, his small hands gripping the shoeshine kit like a lifeline. Inside, the mansion felt as vast as it looked from the outside. High ceilings and marble floors gave way to grand staircases and long hallways adorned with muted paintings. Justin's footsteps echoed faintly as he followed Albert through the main foyer. He couldn't decide if the house was impressive or intimidating. Probably both. "Sit here," Albert said, guiding Justin to a plush armchair near the fireplace. "I'll get you something warm to drink." Justin nodded, his eyes darting around the room. He felt out of place, like a smudge on something pristine. He could feel Donna's gaze from across the room, sharp and unyielding. "You're awfully quiet," she said finally, breaking the silence. Her voice wasn't unkind, but it lacked warmth. "What's your story, boy?" Justin glanced at Albert, who had returned with a steaming cup of cocoa. "I don't really have one," he said hesitantly. "I just shine shoes." "Is that what Albert told you to say?" Donna pressed, her tone skeptical. "Donna," Albert said sharply, handing Justin the mug. "Let him breathe, he's been through enough." Donna pursed her lips, but didn't reply, retreating to the edge of the room. Justin sipped the cocoa, the warmth spreading through him. It was rich and sweet, unlike anything he'd had in years. After a few moments, Albert crouched down beside him. "Justin," he said gently. "I want to help you find out more about your parents. There's someone I know who's good at finding answers." "Why?" Justin asked, his voice laced with suspicion. "Why do you care?" Albert met his gaze, his expression serious but kind. "Let's just say, I've lost someone important too, and I think helping you might help me too." The boy stared at him for a moment, then nodded. "Okay." Later that evening, Albert stepped into his study, the weight of the day pressing on his shoulders. He picked up the phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "David," he said, when the line connected, "I need your help." "Albert," the voice on the other end replied, surprised but intrigued. "It's been a while. What's going on?" Albert hesitated, glancing toward the hallway, where Justin's faint footsteps could still be heard. "There's a boy. His name's Justin. I think he's Adam's son." The silence on the other end stretched for a beat too long. Then David said, "Tell me everything." Albert outlined the details, Justin's photo, Shirley's name, and the scant information the boy had about his parents. By the time he finished, his voice was taut with both urgency and something he couldn't quite name. Hope, maybe. "Can you find out about Shirley?" Albert asked. "Who she was, where she lived, everything. And if there's a way to confirm, a DNA test. I need to know." David exhaled. "I'll take the case. But Albert, you might not like what you find." "I'm prepared for that," Albert replied quietly. "Just find the truth." As he hung up, Albert leaned back in his chair, staring out the large window overlooking the quiet Boston night. For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of purpose, however uncertain. Upstairs, Justin lay curled on the edge of a bed that felt too big for him, his shoe kit still within arm's reach. Neither of them knew what the future held, but for now, they were both exactly where they needed to be. David worked swiftly. In the days following Albert's call, he pieced together the scattered fragments of Shirley's life, tracing her story through hospital records, rental agreements, and a few sparse mentions in old employer files. Each thread was faint, as if Shirley had existed only in the periphery of the world, but David's tenacity paid off. Albert paced his study as he waited for David's report, the tension in his chest growing heavier with each passing hour. His thoughts raced. Justin upstairs, Donna's skepticism, and the growing certainty that Adam had kept secrets he could no longer defend. Finally, David called. "I've got answers," he said without preamble. Albert sank into the leather chair, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the phone. "Go on," Albert urged, his voice taut. "Shirley Brooks," David began. "She met Adam about 8 years ago when he was in New York for a work assignment. She was a waitress at a small diner, but she had ambitions. Wanted to study, maybe start her own business one day. The two of them became close fast. By all accounts, Adam seemed to care deeply for her." Albert closed his eyes, picturing his son's charismatic smile and the way he'd always drawn people in. It wasn't hard to imagine him and Shirley together. "And Justin?" Albert asked. "Shirley got pregnant," David said, his tone softening. "She kept working through the pregnancy, but things got difficult. From what I could gather, Adam knew about the baby. He planned to come back to Boston to tell you and Donna, but—" David hesitated, and Albert's breath caught. "But what?" "He never made it. The accident happened just days before he was set to return. Shirley gave birth to Justin alone. Complications during labor. She didn't survive. The boy was left in the care of a neighbor for a while, but he slipped through the cracks." Albert felt the words like physical blows. His son, so full of life and promise, had been on the verge of sharing something so monumental, a child, a future, only for fate to intervene. And Shirley, young and hopeful, was reduced to a name on a death certificate. "And the DNA test?" Albert pressed, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's a match," David confirmed. "Justin is Adam's son." Albert exhaled shakily, his hand gripping the edge of the desk as relief mingled with an overwhelming guilt. How had he not known? How had he missed the signs? "I'm sending you the full report," David continued. "But Albert, what you do next is up to you." Albert thanked him and hung up, the phone feeling heavy in his hand. He stared at the framed photo of Adam on his desk, taken during a family trip years ago. Adam's easy grin seemed almost mocking now, as if to say, "You missed this, Dad. You didn't see me." Later that evening, Albert sat in the dim light of the sitting room, the report spread before him. Justin was asleep upstairs, his small body curled into a corner of the massive guest bed. Albert hadn't told Donna yet. He wasn't ready. How could he explain that their son had left behind not just a legacy, but a living, breathing connection to the life he never got to finish? But he knew Donna deserved the truth. She had to know, even if it shattered her fragile sense of peace. That evening, Albert found Donna in the sitting room, her knitting needles clicking softly as she worked on a project she'd started and abandoned months ago. She didn't look up as he entered, but her posture stiffened. "I need to talk to you," Albert said, his voice calm but firm. Donna set the knitting aside, her gaze wary. "What is it?" "It's about Justin," he began, sitting across from her. "I've been working with David, trying to understand where he came from." "And?" Donna's tone was cool, but her eyes betrayed her unease. Albert took a deep breath. "Shirley, his mother, was someone Adam knew. They had a relationship, Donna, a serious one. Justin he's Adam's son." Donna froze, her expression blank as if her mind couldn't process the words. Then slowly, her eyes narrowed. "What are you saying, Albert?" "I'm saying that boy upstairs is our grandson," Albert said, his voice steady but thick with emotion. The DNA test confirmed it. Donna's knitting fell to the floor as she stood abruptly, her hands trembling. "How long have you known?" "I suspected," Albert admitted, "but I only got confirmation today. I didn't want to say anything until I was sure." Donna turned away, her hands gripping the back of her chair. Her shoulders shook, and for a moment, Albert thought she might cry. But when she turned back, her face was a mask of conflicted emotions, anger, sadness, and something else he couldn't quite name. "Adam never told us," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He never said a word." Albert stood, crossing the room to place a hand on her shoulder. "Maybe he didn't get the chance," he said gently. "But we have the chance now, to make this right." Donna shook her head, her gaze distant. "I don't know if I can do this, Albert. It's too much." "You don't have to decide now," Albert said softly. "But I want you to meet him. Truly meet him. He's not just some boy. He's family." Donna didn't respond, but Albert saw the way her hands clenched and unclenched, as though she were grappling with something too big to hold. He gave her a moment before stepping back. "There's something else," he added. "I want to visit Shirley's old home, see if there's anything there that might help us understand more about her and about Justin's life." Donna nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. "Fine," she said at last. "But Albert, this doesn't make everything better." "I know," he said quietly, "but it's a start." As Albert left the room, he felt the weight of the truth settle over him. Upstairs, Justin sat cross-legged on his bed, flipping through the same worn photo of Adam and Shirley. Neither of them knew what the next step would bring, but for the first time, Albert felt a glimmer of hope that they were moving toward something better. Albert sat at the breakfast table, the report David had sent lying folded in his lap. Across from him, Justin munched on a piece of toast, his eyes darting around the ornate dining room as though he were still trying to map out its enormity. Albert studied him carefully. The angle of his jaw, the unruly way his hair curled at the edges. Every feature seemed to mirror Adam's at that age. "Justin," Albert began softly, setting his coffee cup down. The boy looked up, crumbs still clinging to the corner of his mouth. "I need to tell you something." Justin's chewing slowed, his gaze sharpening. "What is it?" Albert hesitated. How could he explain years of grief, secrets, and the shocking discovery of a connection neither of them had anticipated? But Justin deserved the truth. "Do you remember the name Adam? The one you used to listen about?" Albert asked. Justin nodded slowly. "Yeah, that's all I know about the man who my mom loves." Albert swallowed hard. "Adam was my son," he said, his voice steady but laced with emotion. "He was your father." The silence that followed was deafening. Justin's eyes widened, his hand frozen mid-reach for another bite of toast. "What?" he whispered. Albert leaned forward, his expression earnest. "I had a test done. It confirmed what I already suspected. You're my grandson, Justin." The boy's face shifted through a series of emotions: shock, confusion, and something raw, harder to define. He pushed his chair back slightly, as though needing distance to process the words. "So, you mean I have family?" His voice cracked on the last word. "You do," Albert said firmly. "You've always had family." Justin's lips trembled, but he pressed them together, blinking rapidly. "Why didn't anyone tell me? Why didn't my dad, come for me?" Albert's chest tightened. "He wanted to," he said gently. "But he didn't get the chance. There was an accident before he could tell us about you or your mother." The boy's shoulders slumped, and he looked down at his lap. "So he didn't leave because he didn't want me?" "No," Albert said quickly, his voice thick with conviction. "He cared. I'm certain of it. And now that I know about you, I want to make sure you never feel alone again." Justin sniffed, his small hands gripping the edge of the table. I thought I didn't matter to anyone." "You matter," Albert said, his voice breaking slightly. "You matter more than you know." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Justin nodded, his expression a mixture of hesitant hope and lingering pain. "Okay," he said quietly. "I'll try to believe you." Later that day, Albert found Donna sitting in the sunroom, her knitting abandoned in her lap. She turned as he entered, her expression guarded. "I told Justin," Albert said simply. Donna's eyebrows rose, but she said nothing. "He knows about Adam, about everything." "And how did he take it?" she asked, her voice measured. "He's a boy who's been through too much," Albert replied, "but he's strong, just like Adam." Donna looked away, her fingers tightening around the knitting needles. "I don't know if I can see him as Adam's son," she admitted. "Every time I look at him, I just see everything we lost." Albert stepped closer, his tone softening. "But don't you also see what we've gained? He's a part of Adam, Donna. A part of him that's still here." Donna's lip quivered, but she set her jaw, her expression stubborn. "What do you expect me to do, Albert? Pretend everything is fine?" "No," Albert said gently. "I expect you to let yourself feel again. Start small. Just get to know him." Donna didn't respond, but Albert saw the faintest crack in her armor. He decided not to push further. That evening, as the household quieted, Albert sat down with Donna again, a glass of wine in his hand. "There's one more thing I want to do," he began. Donna looked at him warily. "What now?" "I want to bring Shirley's grave here," Albert said. "To Boston, to place her near Adam. Donna stiffened, her fingers curling tightly around the armrest of her chair. Why? "She's part of this story," Albert explained. "She's part of Adam's life, and now she's part of ours. It feels wrong to leave her alone, forgotten." Donna's gaze dropped, her shoulders relaxing slightly. "You think it'll help?" she asked softly. "I think it's the right thing to do," Albert said. "For her, for Justin, for all of us." Donna nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. "Then we'll do it." The next morning, Albert and Donna began making plans for the trip to New York. As they prepared, Justin watched them from the doorway, his small figure framed by the sunlight streaming in. Donna caught his gaze and, for the first time, gave him a small, tentative smile. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The New York air was heavy and warm, a stark contrast to the crisp chill of Boston. Albert adjusted his tie absently as they stepped out of the rental car, Donna trailing a few steps behind. Her silence had been palpable during the flight, and it carried now as they stood before the weathered building of the hospital where Shirley had spent her last moments. Albert paused, glancing back at Donna. "Are you ready?" he asked softly. Donna nodded, her lips pressed tightly together. She didn't trust herself to speak. Instead, she followed Albert through the sliding doors into the dimly lit lobby. The staff was accommodating, guiding them to the archives, where Shirley's records were stored. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, handed over a thin folder. "Not much here, I'm afraid," she said apologetically. She came in alone, no family listed. It was a difficult case. Albert nodded his thanks and opened the file. The sparse details hit him harder than he expected. Shirley Brooks, 24 years old, emergency cesarean section, severe postpartum hemorrhage, deceased within hours of delivery. "Shirley was so young," Donna murmured, breaking her silence. She leaned over his shoulder, her fingers brushing lightly against the edge of the folder. She barely had a chance. Albert swallowed, his throat tight. "Let's find her." A small, neglected cemetery with overgrown grass and rusting chain-link fences was located on the outskirts of the city. The caretaker led them down a narrow path, his boots crunching on gravel. "Brooks, Shirley," he muttered, checking his notes. "Right over here." They stopped at a modest headstone, the lettering faint from years of wear. It read simply, "Shirley Brooks, 1993-2017. A loving soul." Donna inhaled sharply, her hand covering her mouth. The grave was bare, save for a few scattered leaves. Albert crouched, brushing debris away from the stone as he read the inscription again. A lump formed in his throat. "This was her resting place," Donna whispered. "All alone, with no one to tend to her." Albert nodded, his fingers tracing the rough edges of the stone. "She didn't deserve this," he said quietly. "She gave everything to bring Justin into the world, and this is how she was remembered." Donna kneeled beside him, her gaze fixed on the headstone. "She must have loved Adam," she said, her voice trembling. "To go through all this, to bring his child into the world, she must have loved him deeply." Albert placed a hand on Donna's shoulder, steadying her. "We'll bring her home," he said firmly. "We'll give her the peace she deserves." "Listen up to here. If you are feeling really touched and grateful, please leave a comment, Daisy, as a gift for Shirley and your deceased loved ones. And now, we will continue this touching story." The journey back to their hotel was somber, the weight of Shirley's life and death settling over them. Justin waited in the lobby, his small frame perched on the edge of an armchair. His eyes lit up when he saw them, but his smile faded when he caught their expressions. "Did you find her?" he asked, standing as they approached. Albert kneeled in front of him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We did," he said gently. "We found her resting place. It's not far from here." Justin's gaze dropped, his hands twisting together. "What was it like?" "It was quiet," Donna said softly, stepping forward. "Too quiet. She deserves better." Justin looked up at her, surprise flickering across his face. For the first time, there was no hesitation in Donna's voice, no guarded tone. She kneeled beside Albert, her hand brushing against Justin's. "She was brave, Justin. She went through so much, and she loved you." Tears welled in Justin's eyes, but he blinked them away quickly. "I wish I could have met her," he whispered. Donna reached out, tucking a strand of his unruly hair behind his ear. "In a way you did. She's in you, in your kindness, your strength. She's part of who you are." Justin looked between them, his small frame trembling with the weight of emotion. Finally, he nodded. "What happens now?" Albert stood, his expression resolute. "We bring her home. We'll make sure she rests near Adam, where she belongs." That evening, Donna sat by the hotel window, staring out at the city lights. Albert joined her, placing a gentle hand on her arm. "You were good with him today," he said. Donna sighed, her fingers tracing invisible patterns on the armrest. "I see so much of Adam in him. It's hard not to, but it's more than that. He's his own person, Albert, and he's been through so much." Albert nodded, understanding. "I think Adam would have been proud of him, and of us, for trying." Donna smiled faintly, her gaze softening. "We'll bring Shirley home. For Justin, for Adam, for all of us." The next morning, Albert and Donna made arrangements to relocate Shirley's grave to Boston. As they finalized the paperwork, Justin stood nearby, watching with quiet determination. For the first time, he felt like he truly belonged, like he was part of something bigger than himself. As they left New York, Albert glanced at Donna and Justin sitting side by side in the back seat. The journey wasn't over, but the family they were becoming felt stronger with every step. The crisp Boston air greeted them as they stepped out of the car, the early morning sun casting a gentle light over the quiet cemetery. A small crowd of workers stood by, ready to help with the relocation process. Albert and Donna led Justin along the gravel path toward the newly prepared gravesite, nestled under the sheltering branches of a sprawling oak tree. Just a few steps away lay Adam's grave, its polished headstone reflecting the sunlight. Justin clutched a bouquet of lilies tightly in his small hands, his steps faltering as they approached the site. Albert rested a steadying hand on his shoulder. "Take your time," he said gently. The workers began their solemn task, carefully placing Shirley's ashes into the freshly dug spot. It was a delicate process, one that spoke of respect for the life she had lived and the sacrifices she had made. The atmosphere was heavy with silence, broken only by the soft rustle of leaves and the faint scrape of tools against the earth. As the workers stepped back, their task complete, Albert motioned for Justin. "Go ahead," he encouraged. "Say what's in your heart." Justin hesitated, staring at the simple wooden cross that marked Shirley's temporary resting place. He stepped closer, his small figure dwarfed by the enormity of the moment. Taking a deep breath, he kneeled by the grave, placing the lilies at its base. "Hi, Mum," Justin said softly, his voice trembling. "I didn't know you, but I think about you all the time. I know you must have loved me, because you gave me everything you had, even if it meant you couldn't stay. I'm sorry you were alone for so long, but you're not alone anymore." His voice broke, but he pressed on. "I'll make you proud, I promise. I'll be someone you can look down on and smile. And I'm not alone now either. I have a family. Grandpa and Grandma are taking care of me. You gave me that." Donna's breath caught as she watched Justin, his words raw and honest. She felt a pang deep in her chest, a pain that wasn't grief, but something gentler, something warmer. She reached for Albert's hand, squeezing it tightly as tears streamed down her face. Justin stood slowly, wiping his eyes with his sleeve. He turned to Donna and Albert, his expression a mixture of sadness and newfound determination. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for bringing her here." Albert nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "It's where she belongs, with Adam, and with us." The three of them stood in silence, their gazes fixed on the graves of Shirley and Adam, side by side at last. The symmetry felt right, as though a fractured story was finally being pieced together. After a while, Donna stepped forward. She knelt beside Shirley's grave, her fingers brushing lightly against the headstone. "I wish we'd met," she said softly. "You must have been an incredible woman to do what you did for Justin, and for Adam. I promise we'll take care of him. We'll love him the way you would have." Justin's eyes widened slightly as he watched Donna. Her voice carried a warmth he hadn't heard before, a sincerity that reached beyond her words. For the first time, he felt a connection with her, not just as someone sharing his grief, but as someone who truly cared for him. Donna turned to him, her gaze tender. "You're a remarkable boy, Justin," she said, her voice trembling. "And I'm so proud to call you my grandson." Justin froze, the words settling over him like a soft blanket. He had spent so long convincing himself that he didn't need anyone. That family was just a word people used. But here it was, offered freely, with no strings attached. A family. His family. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Donna rose and pulled him into an embrace, her arms wrapping tightly around his small frame. For a moment, Justin stiffened, unused to the sensation. But then he melted into her warmth, his tears soaking into her coat. Albert stepped forward, placing a hand on both their shoulders, his own eyes glistening. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, they lingered by the graves, sharing stories and quiet moments of reflection. It wasn't just a goodbye to Shirley. It was a celebration of her life, her love, and the legacy she had left behind. By the time they left the cemetery, something had shifted between them. The unspoken barriers that had kept them apart were falling down, and a bond born of love and loss was starting to form. Donna held Justin's hand as they walked back to the car, her touch steady and reassuring. For the first time, their family felt whole. Not perfect, not without scars, but whole. And for Justin, that was more than enough. The sound of silverware clinking against porcelain filled the dining room as Justin tentatively cut into his pancake, glancing around the table. It had been a month since Shirley's grave was relocated, and life in Boston was beginning to feel different. For once, the house wasn't just a cold expanse of marble floors and silent hallways. It felt alive. Albert sat at the head of the table, flipping through the morning paper, but his eyes drifted often to Justin. Donna sipped her coffee quietly, her demeanor softer than it had been in years. She reached for the butter dish, nudging it toward Justin without a word, and he looked up in surprise. "Go on, eat up," she said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "You'll need energy for school today." "Thanks," Justin mumbled, still adjusting to the idea of someone caring about his meals. The school part was still surreal to him. Just 2 weeks ago, Albert had enrolled him at a private academy, and the sight of crisp uniforms and polished shoes had been overwhelming. But now, Justin found himself enjoying it. The quiet classroom, the kind teachers, and, most surprisingly, the friends he'd begun to make. Later that afternoon, Justin stood in the garden, watching a squirrel dart across the grass. Donna appeared behind him, a basket of freshly picked flowers in hand. "Do you like the garden?" she asked, placing the basket on a nearby bench. Justin nodded. "It's peaceful here." Donna sat beside him, arranging the flowers with careful precision. "Adam loved this garden," she said after a moment. "He used to play here for hours when he was your age." The candor in her voice surprised Justin, who turned to face her. "What was he like?" Donna smiled faintly, her hands pausing over a bloom. "He was adventurous, always running, climbing, and finding trouble in the most unexpected places. He had a laugh that could light up the whole house." Her voice grew quieter. "You remind me of him sometimes. The way you tilt your head when you're thinking, or how you always seem to notice the small details others miss." Justin's throat tightened. "I wish I'd known him." Donna reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. "In a way you do. He's a part of you, Justin, and you're a part of us now." The warmth in her voice settled over Justin like a comforting blanket. He didn't respond, but his small nod said enough. Evenings in the mansion had changed too. Albert no longer retreated to his study the moment dinner was over. Instead, he stayed in the living room with Donna and Justin, often flipping through old photo albums or teaching Justin how to play chess. One night, as Albert leaned back in his armchair after a particularly long game, he watched Justin carefully line up the chess pieces for another match. "You're settling in well," Albert said, his voice tinged with pride. Justin looked up, a shy smile spreading across his face. "Yeah, I guess I am." Albert folded his hands, his expression softening. "You've brought a lot of light into this house, Justin. More than I think you realize." Justin blinked, unused to hearing such affirmations. "Really?" "Really," Albert said. "You've reminded me, and your grandma, that there's still joy to be found, even after everything we've lost." Donna, seated nearby with her knitting, glanced up and nodded. "It's true," she said simply. "You've given us something we didn't even know we needed." Justin ducked his head, his ears burning with a mixture of pride and embarrassment. "I'm just being me." "And that's more than enough," Albert replied. The days melted into weeks, and the mansion continued to transform. Meals became lively events, filled with stories and laughter. Justin's room, once bare, was now adorned with shelves of books, posters of his favorite baseball team, and a small desk where he eagerly completed his homework. On weekends, Donna taught him how to bake cookies, her patience surprising even herself. "You're better at this than Adam ever was," she teased one afternoon, ruffling his hair. "Really?" Justin asked, grinning. "Oh, he'd burn toast if you let him," she said, laughing. The sound was light and genuine, and Albert, passing by, paused to savor the moment. One evening, as they finished dinner, Albert cleared his throat. "There's something we need to plan," he announced, his tone deliberately casual. Donna raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "Justin's birthday," Albert said with a smile. Justin blinked, caught off guard. "You don't have to do anything big," he said quickly, his voice tinged with hesitation. "I'm not used to—" "Nonsense," Donna interrupted, her voice firm but warm. "It's your first birthday with us, and we're going to celebrate it properly." Justin looked between them, his chest tightening. He couldn't remember the last time anyone had cared about his birthday, let alone planned something for it. "Okay," he said quietly, a small smile creeping onto his face. Albert clapped his hands together. "Good. We'll make it special. Just wait and see." That night, as Justin lay in bed, he stared at the ceiling, a feeling of contentment washing over him. For the first time in as long as he could remember, he felt at home. Not just in a house, but in a family. And that was a gift he'd never thought he'd have. The mansion buzzed with quiet anticipation as the sun rose on the day of Justin's birthday celebration. Donna and Albert had spent the week preparing, ensuring the day would be memorable. The dining room was transformed with balloons, streamers, and a cake resting on the long oak table, its frosting a vibrant blue adorned with the words, "Happy Birthday, Justin." Justin awoke to the smell of baked cinnamon rolls wafting up to his room. He stood there for a moment, lost in the unfamiliar sensation of excitement. Birthdays had always been just another day for him, often spent working or wandering, hoping for kindness from strangers. But this year was different. He dressed quickly, his steps lighter than usual, as he made his way downstairs. When he reached the dining room, Donna was there, arranging a small stack of presents on the table. She looked up and smiled warmly. "Good morning, birthday boy." Justin flushed, a shy smile spreading across his face. "Morning," he mumbled. "This is a lot." "It's just the beginning," Albert said, entering the room with a tray of steaming cups of cocoa. "We've got a whole day planned. But first, breakfast." As he sat at the table and felt the warmth of those who genuinely cared for him, Justin's heart grew larger. The day unfolded with ease and laughter. Albert took Justin to the local museum, indulging his curiosity about science and history. Donna joined them for lunch at a cozy cafe, where Justin couldn't stop grinning as they sang him a clumsy, off-key rendition of Happy Birthday. By the time they returned home, the evening was settling in, and the three of them gathered in the living room. The fireplace crackled softly, casting a warm glow over the room. Justin glanced at the stack of presents still sitting on the table. He bit his lip, hesitating before speaking. "There's, something I made for you both," he said, his voice nervous but steady. Donna and Albert exchanged curious glances as Justin disappeared upstairs. Moments later, he returned, clutching a wrapped canvas. He handed it to Albert, shifting on his feet as he avoided their gazes. "Go on, open it," Justin urged. Albert carefully unwrapped the canvas, revealing a painting that took his breath away. It depicted Adam and Shirley standing together, their expressions radiant. Behind them was a soft glow, as if the sun itself was embracing them. Donna gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes as she leaned closer to examine the details. The familiar tilt of Adam's head, the warmth in Shirley's smile. "Justin," she whispered, It's beautiful." Albert stared at the painting, his throat tightening. "You painted this?" Justin nodded, his cheeks red. "I wanted to do something to thank you. For everything. I thought, maybe this would make you happy." Donna reached for Justin, pulling him into a tight embrace. "Happy doesn't even begin to describe it," she said, her voice breaking. "You've given us a gift we'll treasure forever." Albert placed a hand on Justin's shoulder, his grip firm but gentle. "You've brought Adam and Shirley back to us in a way I didn't think was possible. Thank you, Justin. Truly." Justin smiled, his eyes shimmering with unshed tears. For the first time, he felt like he belonged, not just as a guest or an outsider, but as part of a family. As the evening wound down, the three of them sat by the fire, the painting proudly displayed on the mantel. Albert sipped his tea, his thoughts turning to how much had changed since Justin entered their lives. The once silent mansion was now filled with laughter and purpose. Donna had emerged from her grief, her days brighter with Justin's energy. And Albert himself felt renewed, his life infused with meaning he hadn't known he was missing. "Justin," Albert said, breaking the comfortable silence, "you've brought so much to this family. Your parents would be proud of you. And so are we." Justin looked up, his heart swelling at the words. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze drifting to the painting on the mantel. "I'm proud to be part of this family," he said softly. Donna reached over, placing her hand over his, "And we're proud to have you." As the fire crackled and the evening deepened, the house felt more alive than ever before. It wasn't just a mansion anymore, it was a home. For Albert, Donna, and Justin, the future felt brighter than they could have ever imagined. Many years had passed since that transformative birthday celebration. The once vibrant mansion was quieter now, its grand halls carrying an air of reverence. Albert and Donna had both passed away peacefully, leaving behind not just their material wealth, but a legacy woven from love, resilience, and family. Justin stood in the garden, now meticulously maintained, under the sprawling oak tree that had shaded countless memories. He was no longer the shy, uncertain boy who had clutched his shoeshine kit as if it were his lifeline. He had grown into a confident young man, with a presence as steady and strong as the family that had nurtured him. The mansion now served a different purpose. With the wealth he inherited, Justin had transformed it into the headquarters of the Legacy Foundation, an organization dedicated to reuniting families and providing homes for orphaned children. The mission reflected the journey that had shaped him, a journey of finding family, healing wounds, and creating hope. Justin's fingers brushed across a framed photo of Albert and Donna that sat on the desk. Their smiles were warm, and their presence was still a steadying force in his life. "I hope I'm making you proud," he murmured. The Foundation's headquarters were a hub of activity that day. The building was modest but inviting, its walls lined with photos of families reunited through Justin's efforts. A group of volunteers sorted through case files, while children laughed and played in a brightly lit room nearby. Justin walked through the space, greeting staff and checking in on the families they were assisting. One young boy, no older than 7, caught his attention. The boy sat quietly at a table, sketching something on a piece of paper. Justin approached, crouching down beside him. "What are you working on?" he asked, his tone gentle. The boy hesitated, then held up the drawing. It was a family, a father, mother, and child, holding hands under a tree. "Do you think I'll find them?" the boy asked, his voice tinged with hope and uncertainty. Justin smiled, recognizing a glimmer of his younger self in the boy's eyes. "I do," he said, "and until you do, we'll be here for you." The boy's face lit up, and Justin felt a familiar warmth in his chest. Every success, every family reunited, was a reminder of how far he'd come, and how much he still had to give. Later that afternoon, Justin made his way to the cemetery. The air was cool, and the sunlight filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows on the ground. He carried 2 bouquets of flowers, one for Adam and Shirley, the other for Albert and Donna. He stopped first at Adam and Shirley's graves, their headstones standing side by side. The inscriptions were simple but poignant, capturing the essence of the lives they had lived. Justin knelt, placing the flowers gently at their base. "Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad," he said softly. "I've been thinking about you a lot, about everything you went through and everything you gave up to give me a chance. I hope I've made you proud." He paused, his gaze steady on their names. Grandma and Grandpa. They gave me so much. They showed me what family really means. I wouldn't be here without them. Or without you. Standing, he turned toward Albert and Donna's graves a few steps away. Their headstones were etched with messages of love and remembrance. He placed the second bouquet carefully, his heart swelling with gratitude. "I'll carry on what you started," he said. "Your love, your kindness. It's going to live on. I promise." As Justin walked back to his car, he allowed himself a moment to reflect. The mansion was no longer just a home. It had become a symbol of his journey, from a lost boy in a subway station to the man he was today. The Foundation, with its mission to heal and unite, was his way of ensuring that no child would feel the loneliness he had once known. That evening, Justin returned to the Foundation's headquarters. The staff had gathered to celebrate their latest success, a young girl reunited with her long-lost brother. The room was filled with joy, the kind that reminded Justin why he had chosen this path. He stood at the edge of the room, watching as the siblings embraced. He briefly experienced a pang of longing for Adam, Shirley, Albert, and Donna, but it quickly gave way to a strong sense of fulfillment. They had given him a foundation of love and strength, and he was honoring it in the best way he knew how. A volunteer approached him holding a clipboard. "Justin, there's a new case we'd like you to review. It's a tough one, but we think we can help." Justin took the clipboard, scanning the details. He nodded, his determination clear. "Let's get to work." As he looked around the room at the smiles and the laughter, he felt a quiet sense of peace. His struggles had shaped him, but they didn't define him. Instead, they had become the foundation for something greater, a legacy of love that would endure long after him. With a faint smile, Justin walked toward the center of the room, ready to lead the next chapter of his journey. If this film touches your heart, leave your mark with a like, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to explore more meaningful stories with us. Share your feelings with us and tell us your own stories. Every word you share is a building block that helps create our strong and enduring community. Together, we'll create a warm space where everyone can share and connect. Finally, don't miss the incredible stories coming your way soon. We're always here to bring you the best selections, full of deep values yet entertaining. See you there.